If we want to think more logically, then we need to think more logically about terms. We have to consider the various types of terms, their distinctions, their subtleties, their nuances. I'm the Amateur Logician from amateurlogician.com, and together let's think about the logic of terms, and we're going to go through each and every one of these. We have, for example, unambiguous or ambiguous terms. We have absolute or relative. We have clear or unclear. We have vague or exact. We have collective or divisive. We have, for example, univocal, equivocal, or analogical terms. We have concrete or abstract terms. We have universal, particular, or singular terms. We have literal or metaphorical. We have positive or negative, simple or complex, categoregmatic or syncategorematic. And we're going to go through each of these in turn. These are not the same thing, by the way. For example, to be ambiguous is not the same thing as to be unclear. And we're going to cover all of that in a few seconds. Now, a great thing about learning traditional logic is that it forces us to take a step-by-step look at the process of reasoning. We cannot think about arguments or syllogisms in real life without first thinking about propositions. And we cannot think about propositions as they are used in real life without first thinking about terms. So let's think about terms logically. First, we have unambiguous or ambiguous terms. An unambiguous term has one meaning alone. When we're forming a syllogism, for example, we want terms that are unambiguous. Otherwise, the syllogism will be unsound. An ambiguous term has more than one meaning. However, a term by itself is not unambiguous or ambiguous. A term becomes ambiguous when we use it in more than one way. In fact, we might not even know that we were doing this. Sometimes the ambiguity of a term is very, very subtle. We can easily confuse not only others, but ourselves as well with ambiguous terms. To give a very silly example, if someone says all heavy objects weigh over 100 pounds and that this book by Immanuel Kant is very heavy, does it follow that that book by Immanuel Kant weighs over 100 pounds? Of course not. Now, in philosophical argumentation, even some great philosophers seem to have made mistakes with ambiguous terms. They didn't realize it, and they made unsound arguments as a result. Second, we have clear or unclear terms. A clear term is, so to speak, transparent. Its meaning is caught quickly, easily. This is unlike an unclear term. Note that while it is true that an unambiguous term should be clear, no term can be classified as unambiguous or ambiguous until it is relatively clear. Thus, a term being ambiguous doesn't mean it must be unclear. These logical distinctions are subtle to be sure, but important to know. So an ambiguous term does not necessarily mean it is unclear. Ambiguous and unclear do not mean the same thing. An ambiguous term has multiple meanings. It doesn't mean that those meanings are unclear. Third, let's consider vague or exact terms. A vague term has a lack of a precise meaning. Many things in this world are hard to define. They're fuzzy. We can sometimes only settle for vague terms, vague definitions. And a lot of our knowledge is not exact. Hence, a lot of our terms will be vague. In contrast, an exact term is laser sharp. It is precise. Now, for us to become more logical, we need to notice that nuances and distinctions are present here. A vague term doesn't necessarily mean an ambiguous term. So vague does not necessarily mean ambiguous. Vague and ambiguous are two different things. Remember, an ambiguous term has more than one meaning, while a vague term lacks a precise meaning. Something can therefore be vague, but not ambiguous. Fourth, we have univocal, equivocal, and analogical terms. This distinction is important in ontology or metaphysics, by the way. Terms can have more or less flexibility in their meaning and applicability. A univocal term is applied exactly the same to different beings. For example, consider the term man. Man is applied as a term the same when referencing Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They're all men. An equivocal term is applied differently to different beings. For example, take the term well. That's applied different in water was taken from the well versus I feel well. An analogical term is in between a univocal and equivocal term. the same term is then applied to different beings in partly the same way, partly in a different way. For example, good is applied in both a similar and dissimilar way in he is good and that flower is good. A good man is virtuous in a way that a flower is not. Fifth, we have literal versus metaphorical. Once again, we have to note the nuances. An analogous term is not the same thing as a metaphorical term. Analogous or analogical and metaphorical are different. An analogous term is literal. It's not metaphorical. When you say he is good or the flower is good, you're using the term good in a literal way, not a metaphorical way. Now, Peter Kreeft, in his excellent textbook Socratic Logic, gives the example of calling God a good shepherd. That's metaphorical, not literal, as God is not a man with sheep. Next, consider positive or negative terms. A positive term refers to the presence of some attribute, for example, mortal. But a negative term refers to the absence of some attribute, for example, non-mortal. Seventh, we have simple or complex terms. A simple term is just one word. A complex term has multiple words. The subject of a proposition, for example, can be simple or complex. In fact, it can be very complex. It may have many, many words so as to specify the subject in question or the predicate in question. Our next distinction is categoregmatic or syncategorematic terms. Categoregmatic terms can stand by themselves as a unit. They have meaning as a unit. Consider terms like man, computer, apple, hot, cold, blue, green, physics, calculator, pen, tree, or whatever. However, a syncategorematic word cannot stand by itself as a unit of meaning. In this sense, it's not really a term. Take the word the. Well, the what? Well, the is synchromatic. It cannot stand by itself as a unit of meaning. Our next distinction is over universal, particular, or singular. Universal terms refer to every member of his class. If I say all men are mortal, we're thinking about men in a universal sense. A particular term refers to some members of his class. So, for example, some men are wise. A singular term refers to one member. For example, Socrates is wise. 10th, we have collective or divisive terms. Collective terms refer to a group as a whole in a way that considers attributes of that whole. For example, if you say, this team is the best, you're using the team in a collective sense. The statement, this team is best, doesn't necessarily mean that every member of the team is the best, but only that the team as a collective, as a whole, is the best. In contrast, when you declare that all men are mortal, the term men is divisive because each and every individual man is being referred to. We have concrete or abstract terms. An abstract term, in a way, is a mental being brought about via abstraction or reasoning to be considered as such. A concrete term is not. The term red is concrete. We can point to a red apple. But the term redness is abstract. Finally, there is absolute or relative terms. An absolute term doesn't, so to speak, need a relationship with something else. Yet a relative term does. Think of terms father or son. Those are relative terms. Father goes with son goes with father. The term man, though, is absolute. It's not relative in that sense. So here's a brief introduction to the logic of terms using Aristotelian scholastic logic, a very powerful logic to learn and master. It will help all of us become more logical thinkers in this world, and for that reason alone, it's definitely worth studying. If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel, hitting the like button, and also visiting my website at amateurlogician.com. I have a newsletter there. I would appreciate you signing up for it. You can also buy me a cup of coffee, so to speak, if you would like, to help support this YouTube channel. And I also appreciate you for watching it. I very much would like to at least virtually meet like-minded people who are interested in logic and philosophy, who want to pursue the true, the good, and the beautiful. I'm the Amateur Logician. Until next time, be well.